evening. I'm just taking care of a little spring cleaning here at the Poe Museum. But why don't I take a little break to tell you all about Edgar Allan Poe's First Love. Welcome to the Poe Museum's Curator's Crypt. Good evening and welcome to the Poe Museum's Curator's Crypt. Tonight I'd like to tell you about Poe's first and last love, Elmira Royster Shelton. He was engaged to her when he was 17 and again when he was 40, but they never had a chance to marry. So I'll show you some of the artifacts that we have related to her. The first of them is a drawing, which is a copy of one said to have been done by Poe himself as a teenager shortly after he met Elmira. They met when they were both 15, 16 years old, immediately fell in love, and it's said that they could be seen walking along the canal together, playing the same piano keyboard together. But her father, a wealthy merchant named James Royster, disapproved of the relationship and forbade his daughter from seeing this orphan, this actress's kid, Edgar A. Poe. He knew that Edgar Allan Poe had never been legally adopted by his foster parents, wasn't going to inherit anything, so he thought his daughter should do better. And that made Elmira want to see Edgar even more. They sneaked away to a little walled garden on East Franklin Street where the Linden Row Inn now stands. It's said to have been the setting of his poem To One in Paradise. So they made a pact. They became secretly engaged. They planned to get married as soon as Poe graduated college. He could take care of himself, wouldn't have to listen to anybody. So he went off to the University of Virginia, way out in the mountains of Charlottesville. Wrote her love letters faithfully, but she never answered. He returned back after his first year of college to find out that she had dumped him. She was engaged to a wealthy businessman named Alexander Barrett Shelton. Poe was devastated, and shortly after that he ran away from home. He enlisted in the army hoping to see the world. Instead, he never made it any farther than Charleston, South Carolina, ended up at Fort Monroe here in Virginia. And while he was away, Elmira married Mr. Shelton. Neither she nor Edgar knew until later. What had really happened was when Poe sent her love letters, her father simply destroyed them. And when she gave her father letters to mail to Edgar, her father just destroyed those too, so both thought the other had forgotten them. Years pass. Poe moved to Baltimore, then back to Richmond to accept a job at the Southern Literary Messenger. And while he was in Richmond, he married his cousin Virginia. It was about this time, shortly after their wedding, that Elmira said that she saw Edgar and Virginia at a party. She said the sight of the two of them together was agonizing. And she said she eventually had to remind herself she's a married woman and chase those jealous thoughts from her as if they're a venomous reptile. Another account has Elmira making a scene, having to be escorted out of the party by her husband. So not long after this, Poe published a poem in the Southern Literary Messenger called Tu Zante, which is about how he can never return to this world he once knew. This paradise is gone forever. So Poe and Virginia apparently did have a pretty happy marriage until she got sick and eventually died of tuberculosis. By all accounts, Elmira had a very happy marriage. She deeply loved her husband, had a few children by him. Two of them survived to adulthood, a son named Southall and a daughter named Anne Elizabeth Shelton. But then Alexander Shelton jumped into the canal to rescue somebody, and it's said that he got sick afterwards and died, they said, probably from pneumonia. She became a very wealthy widow after that. She inherited a lot of land, had some rental properties, and her fortune continued to grow. But by the laws of the land back then, if she had remarried, as soon as she remarried, her husband got all her stuff. She didn't have the rights to it. So her husband, out of concern for her, left a stipulation in his will to discourage gold diggers who wanted her fortune. He said that if she ever remarried, she'd have to relinquish 2/3 of the fortune. So she was wary of marrying anyone else, falling in love again, and that's when Poe re-entered her life. Before we tell you the rest of the story, let's take a trip to Elmira's house. But it's a muggy June afternoon in Richmond. So before I leave the climate-controlled confines of the Curator's Crypt, why don't I slip into something a little bit more appropriate? Oh, I almost forgot my face mask. Perfect. Elmira's house stands not far from the Poe Museum, over on the 2400 block of East Gray Street in Richmond, just across from historic St. John's Church. The building is now a private residence, so you can't just walk in and take a tour, but there is a nice sign outside that labels it as the Elmira Shelton House, so you'll be sure not to miss it. And it's here that Poe and Elmira were reunited after all this time. She said one Sunday morning she heard a commotion on the front porch. Somebody was trying to get in her house. Her servant said, "You can't just show up unannounced. You got to leave a calling card. There's a proper order to this sort of thing." And she wouldn't let him in the house. So Poe argued with her, said, "Absolutely, Elmira would want to see me." So Elmira finally walked down the stairs. Edgar looked up at her and said, "Elmira, is that you?" And Elmira just said, "Get away, go away, I have to go to church. I can't miss that for anything." So she shooed him away. Poe struck out again. But it wasn't too long after this he heard that a poet up in Providence, Rhode Island had written a poem for him, so he headed back up north to Providence and had a quick engagement to Sarah Helen Whitman. That broke off after about a month. So then the following summer he was back in Richmond. He was giving lectures, he was selling subscriptions to a new magazine that he proposed, he was contributing new articles to the Southern Literary Messenger, which was now under new ownership, and he also had his sights set on renewing his relationship with Elmira. So he started courting her all over again, gave her lavish presents, including a little gold ring with his name engraved on the inside, a gold locket with their initials on the back and some of his hair inside, and also a set of little drinking glasses and a decanter. And these drinking glasses were passed down through her family, and her great-great-great-grandson donated this little drinking glass, a gift from Edgar Allan Poe to Elmira, to the Poe Museum. So for whatever reason, Elmira agreed to marry Edgar. And to prove to her that he was serious and that his bad reputation should be ignored, he joined the Sons of Temperance, pledged never to drink again, and they planned to get married on October 17th, 1849, as soon as he returned from a business trip up north to pick up his aunt, Maria Clem, who was also his mother-in-law from his first marriage, and he was going to bring her down here to live with him and Elmira. And Elmira was cool with it. She'd even written to Maria Clem and said, "I look forward to calling you mother, to welcome you into my house. I've heard only the greatest things about your beloved daughter Virginia." So everything was set. And Elmira said that Poe was kind of sick and shouldn't leave the next day. But he left his house. Very early the next morning, he got a steamship to Norfolk, which was going to head from there to Baltimore, and he died about 10 days later, at the age of 40. Elmira didn't even find out he was dead till she read about the newspaper. She said, "The dearest thing in the world to me has been lost." She didn't know how she was going to keep living after that. Poe had died 10 days before their wedding. Elmira never remarried after that. Her fortunes continued to grow until the Civil War. After that, she fell in hard times. She moved in with her daughter for a while. Remember Anne Elizabeth? Anne Elizabeth couldn't stand Poe. She thought that Poe was just trying to marry her mother to get her money. So now that Poe is dead, she forbade her mother from even mentioning Poe's name in her house. So Elmira got in the habit of just not discussing Poe. When people requested interviews, she usually turned them down. It wasn't until years later she finally accepted a short interview with Edward Valentine, and she said that she and Poe had an arrangement, that they weren't really engaged. Later she had an interview with John J. Moran, and she said not only that they were engaged, but that Poe told her she was the inspiration for Annabel Lee. And she very well could have been. But he also told 4 other women they were the inspiration for Annabel Lee. Over the years, Elmira eventually moved back to Richmond, and it said the only one she would actually allow to mention Poe's name in her presence was her favorite grandson. Whenever she was out late at church, she would return home and her grandson would say, "Is that my lost Lenore? Is that my lost Lenore?" And she would say, "Ah, be quiet. I'm nobody's lost Lenore." After she died in 1888, that many of her grandchildren actually realized for the first time she'd known Poe, because her obituary said as much about Poe as it did about her. And they also found that she had a collection of Poe things, including a priceless daguerreotype, the last photo ever taken of Poe. It shows him just a few weeks before his death. It was taken in a photography studio right here on Main Street in Richmond. Unfortunately, somebody tried to clean it at the turn of the century and destroyed it, so now it is scratched almost beyond recognition. We do have copies of it, old tin-type copies. We also have another daguerreotype that was taken at the same sitting, so we have a good idea of how it looked. Just the original is just destroyed. She also kept Poe's locket, she kept the drinking glasses, and she had this little photograph of Poe. And on the back of it, written in her handwriting, is Edgar A. Poe. Now this is an albumen print carte de visite. This particular one would have been produced no earlier than 1868, so well after Poe's death. And by this time she was living with her daughter, forbidden to even mention Poe's name. But somehow, and for some reason, she acquired this photograph of him, and it wasn't discovered until after her death. Now this piece is also part of the Poe Museum's collection, along with a lot of other family pieces, including Elmira's spectacles. So if you ever wondered what Poe's first love's spectacles look like, come to the Poe Museum and check them out for yourself. Now today Elmira is buried at Shockoe Hill Cemetery next to her husband. If you visit her, she's way off in the corner. Originally it was an unmarked grave for quite a while, until in 2012 the Poe Museum placed a little stone on the spot where she's buried. And on it are some verses from Poe's poem Annabel Lee.
I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee.
So who do you think was the real Annabel Lee? Are you on Team Elmira or Team Virginia? Do you support somebody else? Well, no matter whose team you join, be sure to join Team Poe by signing up for a Poe Museum membership at poemuseum.org/membership. Well, thanks for joining us this week. We hope to see you at the Poe Museum soon. We're saving a place for you.